Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City Council study session meeting of Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. I now call the meeting to order. Now, please let's stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance together. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, excellent. Madam Clerk, would you please read the roll call?
Mr. Mayor, the record will reflect that all council is present.
Great attendance, everybody. Okay, so just a few ground rules, or a lack of ground rules for our study session. We're going to have public comments right after I give the ground rules. There'll be 2 minutes, and you can only speak about what's on the closed session agenda, as opposed to a regular meeting where you could talk about anything that's not on the agenda, and you have 3 minutes. So those are two little differences. In study sessions, we have the option, we dress a little bit more casually generally, and we have the option to speak casually, say each other's first names if we're comfortable doing it. So don't be surprised when you see that. Other than that, in terms of the council, it's the same as we usually do. Just light up your yellow or red light, and I'll call on you. We'll be in discussion mode, and what we'll try to do is get through everybody to have some comments once first, and then if you need what I call a second bite at the apple, you can do that. We'll make sure we get all of our questions answered and all of our statements made by council, and hopefully we'll be done in a timely basis. So with that, let's open it up to public comments, and remember, it's 2 minutes, not 3 minutes, and you can only speak about what's on the agenda, which is the budget study session staff report. Mr. Tabota, hold on 1 second. I need to heat up your mic, and then I could say Ralph, right? Not Mr. Tabota. I'm Ralph. You got the floor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I sent a letter to Council. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it or not. Quickly, in 2 minutes, the message is there's one option being offered to or suggested to Council. There are other options on the table that could be. There's many ways to slice this, and there's many other options available. I would ask Council to ask staff to present some more options before you make a final decision on this. For example, there's no breakout of expenditures year to date. That could be offered. On the capital, there were 103 ongoing projects at the beginning of this fiscal year. There's no way that Public Services can handle 103 projects simultaneously. I suggest that Council and staff bite the bullet on this once and for all. Have some more study sessions, prioritize those 103 projects. It's going to be tough, but do it and work the top 30 or 35 projects. And then as those complete, bring on the next one in the line. Also, there's another use possibly for the gas tax money. Public Service announced that the Adams project from Santa River Trail to Royal Palm, there's $4.2 million of funding, probably needs another $2 to $4 million of funding. That funding has not been identified. Potentially this $720K or whatever it is of gas tax money in lieu of using it for street sweeping could be used to help fund that project. That's federal money that could disappear tomorrow potentially. So time is of the essence on that project. With that, also I think it would be beneficial, Mayor, in all due respect, to have public comments after the staff report, so we could make, public could make comments depending on what the staff presents. Thank you.
Really good comments, Ralph. Regarding your last point, let me take just an assessment. Is there anybody else in the chambers that has comments, public comments? Oh, Jim, you have it? Do you have any preference? Would you prefer to go now or wait till after the staff report?
I've read the staff report.
You want to go after?
No, I'm good.
You're good?
Yep.
Well, why don't we, I don't see any motion from council. Why don't we just do the public comments now? And then, is there anybody on Zoom for public comments? One person? Let's just do them now. Thanks, Jim. You got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Through the mayor, we're facing a $3.6 million budget deficit, and this is a deficient staff report blaming an auto tax revenue without sufficient information to understand if this is a one-time event or a continuing trend. There's no significant insight on how other local autos are performing, no Plaza Mall sales or property tax comparisons. Why isn't there a comparison for how all tax trends are performing across key sectors? Why isn't there a comparison to other cities' auto sales tax? Why isn't South Coast Plaza being compared to Fashion Island? How are property taxes compared to other cities? Why aren't there insights from HDL, who the city pays to analyze this very issue? Here's an idea. Has anyone picked up the phone and called the dealerships on Harbor Boulevard of cars? The good news is GOAT is launched and is thriving. Team members will be asking these questions and have already put in public records requests to support it. Why do residents and business have to do this, though? And I haven't seen any analysis on the federal funding cuts that still haven't been analyzed, right? So what's the solution to balance the budget and account for these revenue shortfalls? Well, it's not a comprehensive, thoughtful, robust list, right? It's move 700 into the gas tax. Guess what the gas tax does? That provides our ability to fill potholes and do street and infrastructure. It's just driving me nuts. Right? Taken away from our CIP budget, are you kidding me? That is a basic role of government. Why isn't the climate action plan on the table, on the chopping block? Why isn't the deferring of all of this paint the town green active transportation on the chopping block? I just think it's short-sighted and irresponsible for this. It's a inadequate staff report, and they haven't put enough options on the table, and what the only options are to take away from the basic role of government, and it's just completely inappropriate. You need to give staff direction to get a better staff report and to give you more options. Prior councils put 6%. They had an ordinance that mandated 6% of infrastructure, so this would never happen.
Thanks, Jim. So we have, hold on one second. We have another speaker. You have the floor, sir. Hold on one second. I got to get your mic hot. There you go. 2 minutes.
Thank you. James Peters, looking at the budget, seeing one line for expenditures, it really looks like it's an open check for, whatever the city wants to spend money on. Typically on budgets, you should see a line by line of these type of expenses that are going on. Also looking at the last 2 quarters on the kind of the quarterly summary of expenses and revenue, it really looks like there's a $7 million downfall from the year before. So if that trend continues, it looks like instead of I guess it has down here, you're looking at 3 million plus less of revenue. It looks like between expenses and income is probably gonna be more like 7 million if that trend continues. So that's a big concern. I'm not sure why the council's not being given full disclosure on all the expenses and why us in the city are not as well. We really should be provided with that. Same thing, I did do a CPR on the basement, which is, I guess that's gonna fall into the budget somewhere. And with an 800-page document, there's still nothing showing what the money's being spent on, which is unbelievable. So, because there's other projects you guys have line by line. So again, you guys have a lot bigger expenses coming up, the revenue's falling, there needs to be places you guys can cut, or this deficit of 90 million over the last 2 years is just gonna grow in size until there's a potential bankruptcy here for the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in the chambers? No, I don't see anybody. How about on Zoom, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Cynthia McDonald, please.
Cynthia, you have the floor. 2 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Yeah, I hate commenting before I see the presentation. And especially in this case, because this agenda report is lacking in substance. What we see here is an option, only one option of how many that staff explored, we don't know. And there isn't much in the way of a breakdown of information. For example, what are the capital projects that are being deferred? What was the criteria used in selecting them other than they are, quote, not critical to public health and safety? Most of the capital projects are for public safety. I can't say much, but I will comment on the cannabis revenue. The city of LA projected a 12% drop in revenues for this year. This city should have followed that path. So, not having much substance, I can't say much else. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Is there anybody else on Zoom? Okay. So we'll close public comment then. And looks like we have the one study session item today. Madam Clerk, would you please read the title?
Fiscal year 2024-25 mid-year budget update. Presentation by Ms. Molina, Finance Director.
Great. Ms. Molina, you have the floor.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. It's my honor tonight to bring forth to you the fiscal year 24-25 mid-year budget study session. Just want to take a moment to thank staff, staff in finance as well as all across departments work diligently to ensure that we're constantly monitoring our revenues and expenses to ensure we're in line. And when we start seeing a little bit of a slowdown, they are part of that strategy. So I want to take a moment to thank all of them. With that, I'll get started. So tonight we'll go through the 24-25 general fund adopted budget, the general fund budget estimates, some of our recommendations to modify the 24-25 budget. We'll review the capital improvement program. We'll also touch base on the federal grant funding update, and we'll end with a budget calendar. For our 24-25 budget overview. As you may remember, the All Funds 24-25 budget was adopted at $239.8 million with a general fund budget of $189.9 million. It was structurally balanced budget at that moment of time with no use of general fund reserves or ARPA funds. We've dedicated over 53% of our general fund to our public safety departments, our police and fire departments. We fully funded the CAN at $6.9 million and our IT replacement fund. We continue to pre-fund our CalPERS UAL, saving the general fund approximately $900,000 a year. And we continue to maintain a strong credit rating of AAA. For our general fund revenues, I just want to give you a couple of key knowledge bases for our revenues. Our sales tax, for example, represents 43% of our general fund revenues. We're one of the only cities that our sales tax is our most largest sales revenue sources, and we receive that money 2 months in arrears. So for example, our holiday sales are December, we just received those dollars in February. Our property tax represents 32% of our general fund revenues, and it's received kind of in line when you pay your property taxes, which is December, January, and April, May. Our TOT, our hotel tax, is about 5% of our revenues, and it is received 1 month in arrears. And our cannabis gross tax receipts represents about 2% of our total general fund budget, and it's also received a month in the rear. So as mentioned earlier, staff continually is monitoring our revenues and our expenses to make sure that our balanced budget stays on track. We're reviewing it daily, weekly, and monthly. We make sure that any swift and early action is key to ensuring a structurally balanced budget at the end of each fiscal year and beyond. All of our revenue estimates are for any given fiscal year prepared 15 to 18 months in advance. So for example, right now we're preparing 25-26. We're preparing revenue numbers how the year 25-26 will end on June 30th, 2026, based on the information we have today. So really the key for us is to continually monitor and expenditures throughout the year and realigning those as how we see the economy. So we're looking at the federal economy, the state economy, and the local economy. That being said, for our economic overview, I'm going to turn it over to Peter, which is our revenue officer for the city.
Thank you. So looking at the economic overview, just to touch base about last year, around this time in late 23, early 24, the economic data that we were seeing was reflecting strong consumer spending, high levels of consumer confidence, a solid GDP, and a resilient housing market. And this was all in spite of, very high interest rates and high inflation levels as well. And a lot of that was being triggered and spurred on by pandemic stimulus like hangover funding that was coming through the government. Also, anticipation of rate cuts by the Federal Reserve, they helped influence consumer behavior because in anticipation of those rate cuts, consumers will see the economy as leading into strength. Sales tax at that point was also beginning to show some early signs of a slowdown, but in most cases, given the economic forecasts that were out there, including specifically for sales tax, they were still, industry experts were still forecasting year-over-year growth based on this continued resilient consumer. In spite of that, though, Costa Mesa staff did conservatively budget a reduction of $1.1 million in the fiscal year 24-25 versus the fiscal year 23-23 adopted budget. Going over some of the current macroeconomic trends, currently there's these signs have an air of negativity to them, and they create concerns for business outlooks as well as for the consumer. And when that happens, it could potentially impact our city revenues. These challenges consist of things such as labor market strains, which potential impacts of immigration policies, especially in certain labor segments. Those certain sectors like home building and service sectors are disproportionately impacted when, depending on immigration policy. And it also increases the cost of labor. If labor supply goes down, we see an increased cost of labor, as well as any inflation impacts to the cost of that labor, which leads to high interest rates. That obviously impacts everything from businesses to consumers. High cost of capital expenditures by businesses, reluctance to do business expansion given the cost, and any new business activity may be put on hold given it's just too costly. And for the consumer, obviously, impacts their the cost of homes, the cost of major purchases such as autos as well, and obviously the interest on credit card balances as well are impacted negatively. Confidence, when consumer confidence and business confidence is lower, that creates delays in business growth and expansion. They may not downsize, but they may be reluctant to increase hiring or put holds on hiring. And for the for the consumer, obviously, confidence plays into what kind of things they'll be doing in terms of major purchases in particular, inclusive of spending on travel and experiences. For inflation, obviously for businesses, if there's an inability to pass along that increased cost of goods, that impacts their profitability. It also, the increase of cost for labor will obviously erode profits, or they need to pass it along to the consumer, which therefore negatively impacts the consumer. And obviously for consumer, it's their daily cost of goods, especially core goods, which will then, decrease any additional discretionary income they may have to do for other things and other larger purchases. And federal policy shifts, in particular, as most people have heard about tariff and immigration changes that could go on, these could all impact businesses and consumers in a variety of ways. Certain businesses worse than others, as mentioned earlier, things like auto sectors where, the parts and the labor could be impacted, as well as things in service sector due to the labor supply decreasing. So taken all together, headwinds to consumers and businesses present potential slowdowns to city revenues, and particularly to sales tax, which is, as mentioned earlier, the city's largest revenue category. Sales tax is a higher proportion of total revenues in Costa Mesa. Many other cities have a high reliance on property taxes. As a lagging indicator, impacts to property taxes can be delayed versus, in our case, with sales tax, which is a more leading indicator or coincident indicator, given the fact that we see it in quicker time. National and state level economic data may not always necessarily reflect the local business impacts due to variances in business composition, consumer and labor demographics. For example, Costa Mesa, in our case, has a higher percentage of businesses in the consumer goods and auto sectors versus some other cities. And generally speaking, at the state level, California businesses rely heavily on immigration for labor in the service sector, farming, and construction.
Thank you, Peter. So where we're at with our general fund revenues, we're projecting our sales tax to be essentially down 3.4% from our year-end estimate to come down to about $75.2 million, which is about a reduction of $6.4 million from our adopted budget. As Peter mentioned, this is mostly attributed to slowdowns in general consumer goods and auto sectors primarily. Our property taxes is in line with the adopted budget of $60.5 million, reflecting the projected increase of 7% from the prior fiscal year. Our hotel tax is coming in slightly under at about $9.7 million, approximately $400,000 under the adopted budget, and our total cannabis tax is coming in a little bit higher. It's about $100,000 for a year-end estimate of about $3.6 million. So for our general fund overview, as you can see here, we're looking at kind of flat for property taxes, sales tax down by 6.4, hotel tax down by 0.4. Some of our other revenues coming in a little bit higher for a total revenue reduction about $6.4 million. Our total expenses, we've identified a couple of total expenditures here, about $2.8 million to help offset that reduction to about a potential loss of $3.6 million by the end of fiscal year 24-25. On our expense side, we're looking at some salary savings across multiple departments. For example, the city manager's office is about 4 vacant positions. Finance department has a few as well. We've had multiple vacant positions in public works throughout the fiscal year. So we feel comfortable that we'll receive at least about $1.8 million in some of that salary savings. On the operating side, we have about $1 million set aside for our Fire Station number 2 bond. Obviously, we have not come to council to solidify that bond, so we will not be needing that payment this fiscal year. However, we are committed to move forward with that bond in this year, later on in this calendar year, but it will not affect 24-25. And we are fully, as you can see, transferring out the 6.8 IT replacement fund for the $2.8 million reduction on the expenditure side for the general fund. So some of our achievements. We ended last fiscal year with a positive $1.3 million surplus. We have strategically used our ARPA monies to ensure that we've provided grants to our small businesses, rental assistance, put some money aside to Project Room Keys. We've also provided an ongoing revenue stream for the Equipment Replacement Fund, which was an issue a few years ago. We financed multiple public safety apparatus, such as ambulances, the mobile command unit, our police vehicles. For a low-interest environment, we were able to get down to 1.6% in some of these cases for our interest before the interest rates were increased. We continue to dedicate 1.5% of our general fund revenues to our IT replacement fund to ensure that we're fully funding our 5-year plan. We fully funded the CAN, which is 5% of our general fund revenues. We have exceeded the City Council fund balance policy of $55 million by $5.4 million. We've done that slowly over the last 4 years, even in the midst of COVID, for our current reserves at $60.4 million, which is about 32.8% of our general fund revenues. This percentage exceeds GFOA's best practices of having a minimum of 16 to 17%. So we have doubled that even among GFOA's best practices. So where do we go for here for our solutions and options? So we are recommending to realign about $700,000 of our street sweeping costs. Currently, the adopted budget includes half of the street sweeping cost in the gas tax fund and the other half in the general fund. We're recommending to move the full $1.4 million into the gas tax fund. We're also recommending to defer capital projects of about 2.9 to be able to attain the $3.6 million of revenue shortfall we anticipate in this fiscal year. We are also planning to implement a soft hiring freeze effective April 1st with no impact to our public safety personnel. For our CIP temporary deferral recommendations, City staff provided here a list of some CIP projects to total about a little bit under $2.9 million. Some savings from some projects that are already completed, some Butterfly Garden, Community Choice Energy Study, multiple City Hall projects, some money set aside from the citywide street improvements, about $250, still leaving about $5.5 million there, and the West Side Restoration Project. Again, this is a deferral of the CIP. However, we do have other capital projects we wanted to present for you as an option A2, which these are all capital projects that have yet to be started, and they're all general fund supported for about $4.3 million. So it provides City Council an opportunity to realign. Maybe there's some other projects that you prefer to defer into a future fiscal year or later this calendar year. For option B, we could use our general fund reserves. The general fund reserves policy, the economic reserves category, was created specifically to address economic instability, which could result in a reduction in sales tax, property tax, or hotel tax. Currently, this economic reserves category has about $9 million set aside. We could use $3.6 million from that category or a portion of that shortfall from this particular category. If we were to utilize the entire $3.6 million, the general fund reserves balance would still be at about $1.8 million above the City Council minimum of $55 million. So basically, what would this look like? So here's our general fund balance reserves. So you can see with the 23-24 audited general fund balance, we ended the year at $60.4 million. You can see in the economic reserves category where we went from $9 million to $5.4, still $1.8 million above the 55, and still maintaining all of our other fund balance categories intact. So that would be an option. So we do have pros and cons when we dip into our general fund reserves. We could avoid reallocating our street sweeping cost and keep it 50% in the general fund, providing more flexibility still in the gas tax fund. We would prevent the deferrals of capital improvement projects, and we would provide a little bit more opportunity to deliberate some future financial solutions. Our cons, though, however, it leads to some short-term fixes. We're delaying some necessary revenue adjustments or some expenditure realignments. So instead of using our reserves immediately, alternative funding solutions should be prioritized to maintain long-term financial sustainability. So reserves should remain a last resort safety net for economic downturns or unexpected emergencies for the city. And finally, given our potential federal funding reductions at the federal level, the use of reserves may be necessary. We may need to tap into these reserves to help fill some of the funding gaps that we may experience if we do get these federal funding reductions, while we identify some other revenue sources and/or reduce some of the programs that are funded by federal funds. So at this moment, I wanted to take a pause before we get into the federal funding update, see if the council had some questions on some of the options that we presented or wanted to discuss some of these capital projects for deferrals.
Does any council member want to ask questions now, or do we want to reserve until we've heard the rest? But if you can go.
I've just got a couple.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Raja, have we ever looked at using an ESCO contract, an energy services provider, to do any of the HVAC?
We have discussed with SoCalRan on some of the options, and they're looking into it.
Yeah.
But if there are any options for us to get any rebates, we'll definitely go after them.
Yeah, we should look at an energy savings performance contract for any of these ones that are associated with HVAC. It essentially allows us to repay the cost of the project on utility bill savings, so you can amortize it over a much longer period of time. And so all the opportunities that anytime I'm seeing HVAC on here, it's really jumping out at me. And then related question on this senior center HVAC improvement or HVAC replacement and senior center improvements. Can you remind me what the scope of this project is?
Yes, Councilmember Mar, it's to replace the existing HVAC units that are on the roof of the senior center. They're quite old, and we have quite a few that needs to be replaced.
Are they failing right now?
They're not failing right now, but
Close.
we think they're close.
And that second line item, the $250K for improvements, is that also related to the HVAC?
No, Councilmember Mar, that project is for general improvements to the senior center to upgrade the flooring, the carpeting, paint, miscellaneous improvements.
Okay.
The restrooms.
And remind me on the West Side substation, I'm actually surprised that $850K, given how much work we've got to do at that site, is that just surface level cosmetic repairs? Because that's I thought that was a gut it down to the studs type job.
So the gutting it down and redoing the project is a multi-year project. So we are looking at phasing it. So right now we're looking at basically doing minor improvements to the existing facility to keep it running for the next several years because we have other projects in the pipeline that we need to take care of, like the Station 2, Station 4, as well as improvements within our police department here. So that's down the line. So we will do minor repairs right now to keep it going.
Okay. City manager, that's a good segue. We had talked about bonding some of the fire station, really significant infrastructure investments. Is that still on the table? And if so, when would we contemplate that scope?
So what we have currently contemplated and we have budgeted is Fire Station number 2 being the first bond that would be issued. Hopefully within the first 6 months of next fiscal year, we have a contract that would be coming to council that would trigger the conversations with the underwriters and the Wall Street firms that would then engage in the bond financing. We have enough in the operating budget to pay about $1 million in debt service, which would be about a 10 to 12, probably $1 million bond, which is about enough to cover one fire station. And so what we were hoping is that we would do these temporary fixes to the West Side substation to make it much more habitable and just provide a better working environment for, especially our officers are the ones that are there now. Code enforcement is off-site, but the part of the West Side substation that's being utilized right now is being used by our police department. And so this would allow for that upgrade, if you will, until we can do a larger bond financing for stations 4 and maybe the West Side substation together. But that would require for us to, basically set aside another $1 million or so in the budget moving forward, which we haven't identified at the moment.
Right.
So it would be a future project, but we could stay on track with Station 2. If things improve, we could also look to see front-loading the West Side substation in this bond issuance. And so hopefully things will turn around in the economy and we could piggyback, or because we have such a good credit rating, and right now interest rates are in a nice spot, we could talk to our underwriters about combining Station 2 and the West Side substation, but I don't see it being more than a $2 to $3 million project. I don't see it being like a 5 or a major complete overhaul. But we could look to see and ask our financial advisors to work with, the underwriters to run a couple of scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big takeaways for me looking at this, and I had very good intentions of doing a deep dive into our CIP before this meeting, and I didn't have an opportunity to. But I think, I need a refresher on some of these projects before I feel comfortable weighing in on one over the other. I'm wondering if for our next discussion, we can have a list of the CIP projects sort of sorted by red alert, Raja dreams about this at night, and then needs to get done, nice to have, and then butterfly gardens, right? And I think that, you know what I mean? That level of categorization helps me make that judgment decision about whether these are things that we can defer. I was shocked to see the West Side substation on this list because we've been talking about how dire it is and that it potentially is having a negative impact on recruiting and retention.
Clarify, it's not in the staff recommendation.
Understood, but
Okay.
it's
It's just a list of, because we knew that you would ask and we wanted to share with you to be transparent, all the general fund supported capital projects that have not yet started.
Okay,
Because we
that's
figured
what
you would
this is.
ask that
This
decision.
isn't like list version 2. This is, okay.
It's really just what hasn't started, but our recommendation is A1.
Okay.
So slide
Yes,
18
Councilmember Martin,
is the
yeah.
recommendation.
Exactly, slide 18 is what we should, I mean, that's what our recommendation
Understood.
is.
I'd still like a sorted CIP by Raja's priority level for contemplation. And my sense is that West Side Substation is on the red alert list. Okay. Sorry, one more, Mr. Mayor, and then I'll be done.
Take your time.
I had asked about this previously, Carol. I know one of the impacts to sales tax has been online sales tax as a result of the Wayfair decision. Can we see it? You don't have to have it now, obviously, but can we see a trend of that over time? Because I feel like there was a minute when we were seeing some pickup from it, actually. So I'm wondering if that's also declining or if we're just seeing an overall shift from retail to online and not benefiting from all of the online.
So we have been seeing a bit of reduction on the pool, but that's because of our brick and mortar. So keep in mind that when we do online shopping, it goes to the Orange County pool.
Right.
And then that pool gets divided up based on what happens with the brick and mortar in each of the cities. So when our sales tax brick and mortar reduces, then our pool will also reduce.
Oh, that's a really dumb way of doing it. Okay. Isn't it the opposite?
No,
No, but shouldn't it be the opposite?
to be honest, at Costa Mesa, because Southwest Plaza, we benefit from the pool overall.
Okay. Is that the county's decision to do it that way?
It's been practiced since I know. I don't know how they came up with the formula, to be honest.
That should be revisited. Okay, I yield. Thank you.
Jeff?
I just had a question about the soft hiring freeze. My question is, I know at the federal level, what we're dealing with is we're approaching what's called a RIF, and that's the federal term for using a reduction in force to save money. I know that the the soft hiring freeze for us means that we have to justify internal movements and also critical positions that may or may not need to be in place for us to do business, and especially meeting the needs of the veterans. So what we have to do is prove it, and we have to provide data, and we have to show there's a formalized process of what we have to go through to satisfy the need that we're asking for. I'm wondering if that's in place here, and if that's what you guys mean by a soft hiring freeze. By the way, if I'm correct on that, that's my first question. Secondly, is there a formalized process, or is it just kind of like we kind of need, we do or don't need this person, one person? I'm just wondering if there's a process in place for that, and if there is, could we see it?
The soft hiring freeze, as mentioned, is we're looking at the miscellaneous staffing vacancies and reviewing to see where we're at and if that's essential to maintaining services. And then at that moment in time, we decide whether we're going to keep it vacant till the end of the fiscal year, which is, 3.5 more months, or if we're going to open it up and go ahead and hire.
So is that, Carol, is that a conversation between you and
I'll jump in because it's really led by my office and HR. And so for us, the soft hiring freeze is much softer than what you're describing. I think the process that you're describing is what we would just call a plain hiring freeze. So for a soft hiring freeze, what I'm expecting at this time is basically just a greater level of, we're always scrutinizing, but just a greater level of scrutiny and discussion with the department heads about every position right now that's non-sworn, that's vacant, to make sure that we need it to achieve city council priorities and to achieve day-to-day workloads. The reason we don't have a savings associated with that is because I haven't had that discussion yet with the department heads. And so we need to have a conversation, department heads, HR, ourselves, look at what the day-to-day workloads are, look to see what are the deliverables for the city council, and see if there's an opportunity there to not hire a specific position. But we have not done that analysis internally, and that's exactly why there's not a savings associated with it. But I did want to share that it's my intent to have those conversations with department heads and to do that deeper dive, especially if things worsen. And so we put April 1st kind of as a tentative start date, but at this time, it's really linked to if things continue to look the way that they're looking right now. If in April, it looks like there is, the GDP comes in at a negative GDP, then we're halfway to the declaration of a recession at the national level. And at that point, yes, it would be a very deep dive into the positions that are still not filled. But at this moment, I haven't had that conversation with the department heads. Those discussions will begin. We'll work with HR. Of our vacant positions, there's only about 30 that are not sworn and we've not made offers to. And so I don't anticipate a ton of savings here, but I do want to start looking at that as yet another opportunity to slow down spending, especially coming into the next fiscal year, if things continue as is.
Okay, and Carol, on the last question, I won't hog all the time. So on the does HDL, when you were having your discussions with them, see this current? I know that there's sales tax, it's a big deal, and we missed the mark a little bit. Do they see this as a blip, or do they see this as a sustained thing? And second part of that question is, if we wanted to see, like, I don't know, say the last 4 quarters of HDL's projections for us in the city, would that be possible to see that? Or is that just wondering kind of, I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, so at this moment in time, we're continuing to see a reduction of the sales tax, even moving forward. Not as large as, too large as what we're seeing. It's a continuous conversation with HDL, and every time sales tax receipts are coming in, we go into the deep dive and specific businesses within the city of Costa Mesa that are unfortunately protected. I cannot share that with you under state law. But we go into the deep dive. Sometimes some cities, some businesses miss their mark. So we go through all of that analysis to see what is happening on a month-to-month basis and on a quarter-end basis. You can find the HDL sales tax newsletters going back multiple periods on our online website. I can send you the link if you'd like, so you can take a look at that.
Thanks, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
Arliss?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I will start with the question on the street sweeping. Can you remind me, I thought we had planned to make a change in how we contract for street sweeping. Is that we were going to bring some of that in-house? Can you remind me what that discussion was and the status?
So, Councilmember Reynolds, at this time, there is no plans to bring that in-house. So we're continuing with our current model of the contracting this.
Okay, but there was a big increase in costs within the last couple of years. Is that right? Like 50% increase or something on that order?
Yes, Councilmember Reynolds, there was a change in the state law that requires that the street sweepers be paid prevailing wages, so that increased the cost of the services.
Okay. That's helpful. I remember being interested in it coming in-house because it would give us a little bit more control to have insights in the sort of strategies or efficacy of street sweeping. I'll just share, every Tuesday, I missed it again in front of my own house, but when I see it come down the street, it's probably sweeping 10% of the street because there's so many cars on the road, and every time I just think and now I look at the number and we're at 1.4 million for, how much of the street is actually getting swept. So I don't know really what to recommend, but I want to share that with you as, I think an opportunity to potentially reduce cost there, maybe not immediately, but certainly over time, because for several years now, I've sort of noticed that I'm not sure we're getting what we mean to be getting out of it. So something to look into, considering that line item has gotten very expensive. Let's see. On the CIP discussion, I agree with Councilmember Mar's request to really see the list I was actually surprised to see recommendations in this presentation because we hadn't got a list as part of our staff report, and I do think we need a deeper dive and some more information on the prioritization there. One other thing that I would want to think about in the prioritization is which projects are most vulnerable to increased costs as we defer. We've seen some CIPs, come back at twice the cost we estimated 3 years before we put the bid out. I'm thinking projects with concrete, maybe with timber now. There's certain CIPs that are maybe less vulnerable because it's mostly consulting costs. So I'd want to see that, and that would certainly influence, I think, my prioritization. So we're not putting ourselves at risk of making projects more expensive by deferring them, or our whole portfolio more expensive by deferring them. And then I think this was covered in the responses on the deep dive on vacant positions. My first reaction to that, and maybe this is a general reaction, I think rightly so, and I appreciate the diligence in keeping an eye on where our revenues are looking and where we can reduce expenses so we don't end up with a hole at the end of the year. I'd like to see more, I think there's thought behind this, but just some more explicit recommendations on where we also need to be investing in growth. So my first reaction to the discussion about positions is don't reduce planning staff or not fill planning positions where we need to have staff to get projects through, right, to support growth, development, outside investment, and so on. And so I do want to, as we continue this discussion, and I think we'll be having this discussion for a couple of years probably, really be talking also about what kinds of strategic investments we need to make to make ourselves less vulnerable maybe to sales tax, to try to grow the property tax piece, to try to support development, to try to support outside investment. So anything you want to share on that here, that certainly comes to mind. And it brings up several years ago, we had talked about economic development plan and also a program to really support local purchases, both internally but also externally. Can we just get an update on where that is? Because I think that topic keeps coming up again, right? How are we really encouraging local purchases to grow sales tax, but also how are we diversifying our revenue base and supporting the different economies in Costa Mesa? Where are we with that? Economic development plan. We're going to make our director, who just joined the city, answer those questions.
Is there a button for this? Oh, it's on. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Carrie Tai, Economic and Development Services Director. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Reynolds. The city last year hit a slight pause on the economic development strategic plan as we were advancing improvements for the permitting system that would facilitate permitting and development. And so it was tentatively scheduled as we got staffed up to resume activities on the economic development strategic plan about this spring. And so we anticipate seeing some activity then. That's our current plan. We've just been trying to balance resources with other priorities, but that's our latest update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So and all of that makes sense, understanding the challenges we've had or the hiring needs that we've had, and I think supported investing in your department in particular. I'll just reiterate my thought process here is I think the sooner we plant the seeds on things like that, right, on the economic development piece, the sooner we'll start to see that fruit. So I know easier said than done, but I think I want to make sure that we're really thoughtful about maybe even leaning in on some investments versus total contraction in response to this. So, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments, or we can defer? Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just more for foundational as I'm heading into my first budgeting session here and first term on council. First, I did want to thank staff for bringing this to our attention. a novice up here, my mindset is, we could have waited till the end of this fiscal year and been faced with a substantially greater shortfall rather than you guys bringing it to us at this time. Give us an opportunity to make some mid-fiscal year adjustments and deal with this now. So in my little world of business and practice, nobody likes to deliver bad news, but I encourage the people that I work for to bring me that bad news because I'd rather deal with it now before it becomes a greater problem later. So I just wanted to thank staff for getting this on an agenda and getting us out here. Again, for my educational purposes, just so that my starting point's correct, there's the all fund budget or the revenue number that was 239.8 mil, correct?
Correct.
And then we're here addressing the general fund budget of 189.9, and we have a shortfall there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I did hear some public comments where they were talking about why are we not considering a climate action plan or active transportation plan. And I'm going to throw a Hail Mary out here, but are some of those things under the all funds budget, which would be tied into other grants and other funds that would be outside the scope of the general fund?
So, Councilman Bulik, I can take that. Just for the capital improvements, you're right. Most of the capital improvement projects, I mean, there are multiple sources of funding for capital improvement projects. So some of them are, like for the street projects, mostly are funded by other funds, like gas tax and Measure M, and we have grant funds, and so many other funds can cover that one. The climate action one is a general fund project.
Okay, so there are certain ones. So, okay, and again, a couple just general questions. So we have this issue we're trying to deal with, and there's recommendations and proposals being made to how we should address this anticipated shortfall. Something crazy could happen. It could be a big upturn in sales revenue, and we're here today and we find out that miraculously it self-corrects, assuming that's not the best course of action. To do this correction right now, how soon do you guys need direction from the dais on that? And the reason I ask that, I'm going to echo what several other council members have said. I feel a little bit ambushed after giving you guys all the accolades for bringing this to our attention. But here's a list, pick guys, and as a new guy who hasn't seen any of these CIP projects, it's all Greek to me. I'd like an opportunity to get educated a little bit and make some informed decisions. But how soon do you guys need some direction on this?
I think anything in the next 30 days would be good. So we can, this is the starter conversation. We did want to give some things to kind of have you think about, but we don't have to bring a recommendation probably until April. On the, for all of the recommendations, whether it's the gas tax recommendation or the CIP, we have time because those projects haven't started yet. And so you would just be affirming, do not begin these projects. And so we can assume those savings and then return the money from the capital fund to the general fund to make it whole.
Okay, thank you. And then, again, it seems like the primary recommendation or proposal, other than using some of our reserves, and everybody says that's a third rail we don't want to touch, and I think in these very uncertain, volatile times, that's probably good advice. But it seems the primary focus is let's find some cuts in the CIP or some defer in the CIP. Are there items outside the COP that were even considered or not considered? And if not, why were we not considering cuts from other areas of our budget?
Well, if I may, we did start this fiscal year pretty lean. So we did not really grow the 24-25 adopted budget because we had started to see a little bit of a slowdown. So we actually did budget essentially a reduction of sales tax of about $1.1 million from adopted to adopted. So we already started, so we budgeted conservatively. That being said, over 75% of our budget is labor. So the other 25% or so is our operating expenses, which we have contractual obligations in there, which are very difficult to cut, especially 75% into the new fiscal year. where it's a lot easier to try to tackle some of the projects that Raja has not started yet, and to identify how we can defer those until we start seeing some of the revenues coming back. And then come back to you at that moment in time and say, this is where we're at with revenues. We might see a little bit more. Let's talk about putting back some of those deferred projects.
Okay, I think somewhere in there, but are there other things other than projects deferred that we could look at?
It would be extremely difficult at this moment in time, because again, we're 75% of the fiscal year is pretty much over. Most of our operating expenses are contractual based, so we have agreements and obligations to move forward with that amount. Now, could we go back and take a look? Probably. I'm not too sure we would get the same amount of savings in such a short period of time.
Okay.
Right, and just to point out that the 2.8 that's recommended in expenditure reductions, that's, part of the whole reduction plan. We're just talking about the capital project cuts and the gas tax, but we are looking at the salary savings. That's basically helping us to save. And then the fact that we won't need to make the bond payment for the fire station rehab until next year. Without making cuts to staffing, it would be very difficult to come up with an equivalent amount of 2.9 million in savings. We would basically have to cut twice as much because we're more than halfway through the fiscal year. So we'd have to come to you with a much larger number. And in addition to that, if it's staffing related, it would obviously impact services to the public. So the best way to bring savings without impacting services to the public and programs, 50% of the budget is public safety, then it leaves for capital, which is a good place to turn. Many cities will turn to that because it's projects that we can defer either for 6 months or a year, basically until the economy gets better without affecting the services to the public, core public services to the public.
Okay, a couple more questions. So I get it. We're 7-8 months into this fiscal year. It's kind of tough to do some major readjustments and realize real savings in the next 4 to 5 months, 5 to 6 months. Going forward, as we're about to head into the budgeting for 25-26, I anticipate this is a good wake-up call. We're working with HDL. And do we have any independent city outreach to some of our larger tax revenue generators? Like, rather than relying on HDL or some other third-party service to advise us on what they sense the trends are in these various sectors, cars or sales at South Coast, do we do any independent outreach to some of our larger auto dealerships or dealerships communities here in Costa Mesa to see what their sense is on their forecast for 25-26?
No, I do not. However, with HDL, we dig deep into each one of the businesses, and when we do see some year-over-year adjustments, we go deep into what's happening, what are the receipts, are they in line, has there been a misposting? We go through all of that. We also talk about how that particular business may be doing in other cities, and is it in line with what we're seeing here in the city of Costa Mesa? So we go through a lot of in-depth analysis with HDL to ensure that we're properly tracking what's occurring with our Costa Mesa businesses.
Okay. Oh, and last thing, again, I think in the agenda packet, the attachment A, I think we had budgeted for 602 full-time employee positions, and our actual to date is 535. Does that seem correct? Am I reading this properly?
Yes.
And when we talk about a soft hiring freeze, and I know there was a lot of discussion on it, we talked about federal and what we do here in the city and whatnot. It would make sense to me that and I get it, you guys will talk to each department head and you'll do an analysis, but in the short term, at least until we get to some sort of guidance here from the DIAs, that there be a soft freeze or call it whatever you will, but at least until we make some decision. If there's vacancies, they remain vacant until we come up with the next plan.
I think that's a fair recommendation on the non-sworn side.
and with that caveat, yeah.
Yes, and then the positions we've hired, because that report is from February, and since then, we've hired or have made offers to 11 positions. So we have 30 positions that are left that are not sworn, and we haven't already brought into the building or made an offer to, and they're about to start.
Okay.
So it's about half the number that's shown in the report, once you take into account sworn and recent hires.
All right, that's all I've got, thanks.
Okay. Does anybody else want to talk now? Manny, yeah,
Thanks,
go
John.
ahead.
Yeah, we're on
Well-
first name basis during study sessions. I want to echo what was said earlier. Thank you guys for bringing this forward and not waiting until next budget. That's important. I did want to kind of dig a little deeper on the vacancies and the soft hiring freeze. What positions have we seen historically not been filled in our budget? Because I know it's very common for us to, want to hire X number of people and then not always hire that amount of people. So what are some positions we're currently looking at for the soft hiring freeze?
Mayor Pro Tem Chavez, I don't feel comfortable saying, I haven't had that conversation with the department heads yet. And so I really need to work with them and HR to determine, even if I know the classification, I don't know what work that person would be doing that could impact your priorities. And so it's premature for me to say which ones those are. I know for sure we don't want to touch public safety, but of the civilian positions, I would really need to sit down with department heads and HR to figure out what exact projects those positions are working on. Because if we want to achieve, for example, our housing element certification and make sure that that gets done on time, that's a conversation with, for example, the development services director about what that specific classification would be working on. And so I don't feel comfortable getting ahead of that process and really understanding the workloads and what everyone is working on. Again, that's why there's no savings associated with that dollar amount, because it may be that there are very few positions that we can hold back without it impacting priorities. So that's still a conversation that we need to have. I can tell you that in my office, I can keep about 3 to 4 positions vacant. I can tell you that without hesitation. We can make that work. Will it have some impacts? A little bit, but those would be internally. I think we can manage those. I feel comfortable with that. But for the other positions, I would really want to understand how that's going to impact your priorities. I don't want to say it's not going to, and then we can't deliver on something that we've promised you.
And I appreciate the candidness, because again, these are be very candid conversations, right? Let's put a pin on that a little bit. I'll circle back in a second. Similar question for capital improvements. I mean, I know obviously we probably need to come back with recommendation from Raja and our city staff, but I do think when we're looking at a budget shortfall, it's due diligence is important. I'm looking at every kind of avenue we can to assess the impacts of a reduction is important. But it's also important to me that we're doing the due diligence, because every dollar saved is a dollar that's going to help us have a balanced budget. I will quickly just mention that for me, I think I'll echo comments about others before. I think public safety is always a critical component of our community, and that's something that should always be the last thing to be cut or touched when it comes to any type of savings. I also view development services in the same light, because that's something that brings in revenue. I was very pleased to see that cannabis is outperforming a little bit of the other sales tax measures. And that was one of the reasons why I was looking into cannabis as another form of revenue. And I want to challenge us also, as we're looking at, scaling back some things, maybe on the capital improvement side or the employee side, where appropriate, obviously. But you also look at ways to how could we be scaling up our efficiency for businesses? How could we become more attractive for businesses to bring in more revenue, to diversify our revenue income stream? Because yes, it does appear to be that big items like cars are on the decline. It makes sense. People are worried about the economy at large. So the people are hesitant to do big investments like sales tax, car sales tax. But it doesn't mean we can be proactive in promoting other services or other businesses in that manner. So these are my comments for now. I'll have more later on, but I just want to have that mindset that yes, we should be tightening the belt. That is appropriate. assuming it is appropriate and not going to damage our vision moving forward. But we also be looking at ways to expand our revenue stream by looking at ways to be more efficient for businesses to open up faster. So that's it for now.
Lauren?
Thanks, John. So I want to agree with Council Member Marr in that we really need to have the opportunity to take a deep dive and really see what some of these are, because it's kind of like we're just getting some surface information on this. Like, let me use an example. For the street sweeping services, it just went up $700,000. It was doubled, yet the services we receive haven't been doubled. And I'm wondering if that is something that can't go up for renegotiation, either with the service provider that we already use, or we bring it back up for bid. Secondarily, it was brought up, and this is a very good point, that some of the streets have cars on them and the street sweeper doesn't even sweep, but they drive by and we still pay for a service we're really not getting. What if we just broke it down to the streets that have blackout days where we know we're going to get street sweeping services on those days, or make the streets that we street sweep have days that you can't park there. That way we're getting our money's worth out of this. We got an increase in payment, but we didn't get an increase in service. I think that's a big one to look at. It's quite a bit of money. The other thing is, have we looked into renegotiating any of our subcontracted services that we contract with, maybe that have increased, but we didn't get more services? If everyone's going to be tightening their belts, I think that they should feel the impact too, and maybe we could look into something like that. Secondarily, when I look at these options 1 and 2, there's absolutely some things in here that we could definitely hold off on. A great example was a butterfly garden. Yeah, we need to hold off on that for sure. But like you said, Raja, we have an air handler for an HVAC system at the senior center that you're saying is on its last leg, and better to fix it now than try and replace it when it's already broken. So I just want to reiterate that we need to have a deep dive into this to make some really sound recommendations. I would want that as well. So just for now, I'm going to hold off on some other stuff, but that's all I have, John.
So I have a lot of comments. I'm going to make some of them now. Some of them are questions. So if you go to page 18 of the slide, we're on this is page 18 of the slide. That's terrific. So I just want to make sure I understand what this means. And it seems pretty self-evident, but I want to understand it. So when it says, what is savings from completed projects? What's that?
So, Mr. Mayor, we have, at the start of this fiscal year, we have 124 active projects. We finished 22 of them already. So there are project savings in those 22 projects.
I see.
So there are some monies that we can, so that's what that means.
Okay, so these are projects that we were able to bring in under budget.
Exactly.
Basically. Okay, and then when it says, for example, I'm not going to go through all of them, but Butterfly Gardens, it is budgeted 100,000, funding deferral 100,000, and it says remaining 0. That means we're basically, for the rest of the fiscal year, proposing not to use that $100,000 budgeted on the Butterfly Gardens, right?
That's exactly right. So we went through the CIP and picked these projects that have minimal impact on everything else that we are working on. And also making sure that, for example, when you see citywide street improvements, we're just taking the $250,000 of the CIP money, because the rest of the money is gas tax and Measure M and other monies. So just take the $250,000 off. So, but we still have significant amount of money left in that particular project. Same with the West Side restoration. We have $1.2 million, and we are take the portion of it off. But we still have significant amount of money left to do anything else we want to do in the next few months, and defer that amount.
Okay, I want to drill down with you a little bit more on that.
Yeah.
So we've got, so you said, so citywide improvement projects, or let's use the easier one, I think, to use is the West Side restoration. It's the same question, but I think it lends itself better to the question. So we have budgeted 1.215 million, right? Yes?
That's correct.
Okay, and then we have funding deferrals, so we're saying the $450,000 is the money in the general fund that we're proposing not to use in this current fiscal year, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but then that leaves 765,000, and did you just say that that money comes from some other source other than the general fund, or what did you say about that?
So
Just now.
a portion of that 765 is still general fund, and the remaining money is from other funding sources.
Okay, but you're proposing that we do spend 765,000 this fiscal year on this project, correct?
Mayor Stevens, I'm not saying we spend it. It's money that's available for us for other projects, for any projects in the west side.
All right, then here's the bigger question about this list is, of these projects, how many of them would we start, is it, all, some, or whatever, if we didn't give direction to not use the funds? The reason I'm asking is, we're sitting here midway through March. If we haven't started these projects, I've been up here long enough to know that there are delays in projects that just occur. And,
Yes.
and are you saying that but for our direction, this money, 2.872 million, would be spent in this fiscal year? Or is it money that, due to just kind of the press of business and delays, wouldn't be spent anyway?
That's a good question, Mr. Mayor. So
Thank
as
you.
I mentioned, we have 124 to start the year, right? So we finished 22. 72 are active projects, which means we are actually working on 72 projects right now in different phases. Some are in design, some are in construction, and some have barely started, but we consider them active. There are 30 or so projects that we haven't even started yet. And some of these are in that list.
Right.
So we will not be getting to these projects in this fiscal year.
So we're not getting to them anyway.
Exactly.
So it doesn't really matter what direction we give to you with respect to this, just because of reasons other than our direction. You're saying, as the director of the department, it's not likely we would spend this money in the fiscal year anyway, right?
So, Mr. Mayor, the thing is, we are saying we are not able to get to these projects this fiscal year, but your action will temporarily take this off our list for this funding
Okay.
for the time being.
And what do you say about the comment that was made, or I think it was a really good observation by, I think it was Arliss, that, by deferring the projects, do you have any understanding of whether that's going to increase the overall cost of the project?
So, Mr. Mayor, looking at these projects, I don't think, they have that kind of impact.
Okay.
Because these are pretty specific, smaller size projects for most part. And some of the projects, even for example, I'll even take the country club modernization. We are recommending 400,000. We have actually budgeted almost $2 million towards country club and tennis center. So we still have $1.6 million left in our budget to handle anything, to get going with the design, to make improvements to the country club, to make improvements to any golf course improvements on the grounds. So we still have funds to if Danny Lane comes to me with something, we'll fund it. So we still have monies available to do those projects. With the West Side restoration, same thing. We can use the money that we have to start doing any design of any improvements in the West Side. And depending on what kind of improvement, let's say if it's a street type of project, we have other funding sources that come into play to fund them down the road. So it's not going to create that kind of fiscal impact, these set of projects.
So I can tell my friends at the golf course that we're going to spend $1.2 million between now and June 30th?
We're not going to spend that. We have the money.
But we have it.
We're not able to get to it.
All right. Well, why not put more on here if we're not going to spend it anyway?
There's a nuance here that I I'm not sure we've covered yet, Mayor. So the key is, if we defer, if you agree with the deferral of these programs or any combination of 2.9 million, because they're not going to happen, just these, that money gets refunded to the general fund. So there's two things that happens. One, the projects won't take place,
I see.
right? But the money is going back to the general fund to reimburse the general fund because it went into 401 as part of the CAN. So we're undoing a portion of the CAN.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I've been bragging for about getting $1.6 million for golf course improvements, and now I'm going to have to eat a little crow, at least to the extent of 400,000. Okay, so I think I understand this document, and are there any of these proposed deferrals that have a risk of losing funds from any other source by virtue of the delay?
Mr. Mayor, that's exactly why we had to kind of go through and pick projects like this. They are not associated with any grants, and there is no immediate work going on these projects, and that's the reason why they were picked.
And so as the city manager just brought up, or Lori Ann just brought up, in order for then us to get this money back, we would then have to, at some other time, reappropriate it into the budget. So it's gone. If we make this direction now, this money is gone. It was 1.6 for the golf course. Now it's 1.2, unless at some other time, either we or some subsequent council gets that $400,000 and puts it back in the golf course. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, we have about, we have 1.6 remaining between golf course and a little bit for the tennis center. Even after losing this 400,000, potentially losing it. Now, council can make a priority of when we get back the revenues down the road, that these get highest priority, for example. I mean, that's one way to ensure that they come back.
Fair enough. Okay. All right. All right. In terms of the explanation of why we're in this situation with all of the external economic factors, I will say that I'm not sure I agree with every explanation, but it really doesn't make any difference because my opinion is as good or as bad as anybody else's opinion. So I'm not going to debate you about that. I'm just going to put it on the record that I was like, for example, inflation is down, relative to times when we made a lot more sales tax. Interest rate, same, but enough about that. I want to talk about some of this stuff is beyond the scope of what we can do in this fiscal year, but I think it's important because first of all, I totally agree, and this is part of that. I completely agree with what Andrea said. I think it's high time that as a council, a new council, newly constituted council, that we take all of these public works projects, we get an assessment of the amount of them and the urgency of them, and then we have our own priorities, either with respect to the various districts that the council members represent or overall in the city, and we have, whatever you want to call it, a food fight about it, whatever it is, but we figure it out and we make a decision and we debate and we align and we move forward because my perception sitting up here for in my 9th year is there's a lot of projects that just kind of keep going on and going on and going on, and I cannot remember that we ever really did a comprehensive reassessment. And some of them might need to be eliminated, some of them might need to be accelerated, but let's hear what the priorities are of this council, okay? That's my suggestion in just, agreeing and seconding what Andrea said. The thing that I don't see in this, in our analysis, is any introspection or suggestion pertaining to the matter at hand, which is revenue. Okay, Arliss brought it up. Manuel brought it up. Is the relationship between developmental services and revenue? Arliss brought it up in connection with bringing on projects that might increase our our property tax base. Manuel brought it up in terms of, hey, don't cut those positions necessarily, having them be, you've got, his point I thought was good. You've got sworn public safety here, and then you've got developmental services that are income producing people, right? So in a time when we need to increase our revenue, the last thing we want to do is cut a department where in part the objective of that department is to do things that end up generating income. So I liked both of those comments as it relates to that department. I will say, though, that, and we've talked about this before, and we talked about it at some length at our April retreat, that we do get a lot of feedback about the responsiveness and the speed with which applicants get through the entitlement process, the permitting process, and so forth. And I just want to bring up like 2 projects and try to create some nexus to sales tax. So with respect to Maddie's Patties, and I got authorization for them to share this story. I went to Maddie's Patties, delivered my little certificate, which is still there right above the ketchup, and I said, how'd it go? How'd it go with the city? I'm the mayor. And they're like, God, thanks for asking. He said, it took way too long, right? They said it took them, what they shared with me is it took them 2 years to get entitled to open. Each month cost Maddie's Patties $20,000. That was their burn rate. As you guys might know, Maddie's Patties is owned by people with some capital, so they could afford it. But from our perspective, that time, that 2 years, and I have no way of knowing whether it should have been 6 months or 1 year or a year and a half or whatever. I'm just sharing to you what I heard, okay? But for every day they weren't open, we're losing sales tax, okay? The next one I want to share and talk about is Ace Hardware. So I have received from, Patrick Murphy, from, the singer for the Fenians, Terry Casey of Rove, a lot of comments about how long it's taking. You have 3 places there, the Goodwill, the Gelson's, and the Rove charging center that's going to generate a substantial amount of sales tax. Again, I have no window into whether it could have been done faster. I don't know. All I'm saying is that I receive calls when applicants are at a pain point and they call me. And if the pain point involves delay, and it almost always does, the consequence of delay is time that we're not getting sales tax. So at our session in April, I think pretty uniformly said we want to focus on, with that department, reforms on being more responsive, moving applications through more quickly, and I think we do as a council really need to receive some reports on that. Where are we at with that? And I think we should receive those reports in reference to, and thinking about it in terms of those issues that we're hearing about could be in part coming to roost in our reduced revenue. Now, a member of the public mentioned TESA, for example. If TESA is an opportunity, and again, I have no window into it, if TESA is an opportunity to do objective analysis of how fast we respond to applicants, how fast we move applications through, I think we should use that functionality to do that and have reports that are shared with the council and with the public about how we're doing in that regard. I think that would be helpful. My concern is a couple things. Number one is not everybody not every business, certainly not every hamburger business is owned by Pat Tenori and Maddie Madison. So my concern is how many people are trying to get through the city process and not doing it and not even opening, okay? What is a gut punch to me as I go down Harbor Boulevard is vacancies. And I see a lot of them. And again, I don't know where these businesses are, but my fear and concern is that the perception that we're having, and I do hear this, not just from Maddie's Patties, not just from Ace Hardware, but from good friends who say, John, I love you, but it's hard to get things through in the city of Costa Mesa. And I'm concerned we're being perceived as a city that is not friendly to businesses, and that is impacting our revenue. I've not done a study on that, but it's a concern. And that leads me to another idea that I have. I'm a board member of OCTA, as y'all know, and just yesterday we received a report from a firm called, OCTA works in an environment of an ordinance called Measure M2. Many of you are familiar with it. There's very specific requirements that were put in the ordinance by the voters. One of them is a triannual analysis done by a consultant just on what we're doing pertaining to Measure M2. And in Measure M2 is so pervasive in terms of its operations of OCTA that it basically touches everything. So basically, it's a checkup for, an outside checkup for the entire agency. We received it yesterday. It was really quite good. Generally speaking, OCTA I can be happy to tell you, is doing well, but they gave some very candid feedback for how OCTA can improve. The company is called Schoberg Eveshank, and I'd like to look into doing something similar with the city of Costa Mesa. I was quite impressed, and many of the other directors were, and Vince Sarmiento even said he'd like to see him do that for the county. So I think that would be something worthy of consideration going forward. Finally, regarding going forward on the budget, what I'd like to see in the next budget, and it's just barely nexus to what we're talking about now. It's talking about going forward. We've obviously added a lot of FTEs in the last 5 years. I'd like to see an analysis of all of the FTEs that we've added and whether they're currently vacant or whether they're filled. And an assessment, if that's possible, I think it probably should be from management as to what do we think about that? I mean, were those investments in FTEs or in positions worthwhile? Have they panned out? Then, of course, an analysis, which I think we've already heard, at least it's 30, but all vacancies, to see if there are any recently appropriated. I think my view is you do this, you look and 70% of our budget is employees that deliver the services to our community. So, but that's 70% of our budget. So we have to look at that going forward, and I know we always do and we will. But it seems to me like the hierarchy is if we've recently appropriated an FTE and it hasn't been filled, that's a good candidate for, whatever they called it back a few years ago, defunding, okay? We're not defunding the police, right? We already established that with Manuel's comment. And then the next level is if there are vacancies, they're something that is maybe longstanding with the vacancies, that's the next level. The last level that I don't think any of us want to get to is, layoffs. We don't want to do that. There are cities that have bright spot here is there are cities with worse problems than us. Orange is laying off police and firefighters, and thank God we're not in that situation. The other thing I want to say, there's some. Sorry, I misled you. I've got two other things I want to say. Is with respect to revenue, it's high time also, we've talked about this for years, and Andrea has talked about this numerous times, is to do a revenue analysis. What about, where are we at with our fees? Where are we at with our TOT tax? I sit on the board of Travel Costa Mesa, and I'd like to see where we're at relative to our neighbors and whether we're leaving money on the table and taxpayers are subsidizing either visitors, or local taxpayers are subsidizing visitors or subsidizing people who directly use our services through fees because we're not right-sizing those, you know? And I'm well aware that some of those fees, including business license tax and transiency occupancy tax, would have to go to the voters, but I think that that's something that needs to be part of the conversation. Then the final thing is, like, what can we do? What are big ideas for sustainability going forward? And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, is I really think we need to do what we can to participate in LA 28, because I think that that could be a game changer. The Olympics could be a game changer for Costa Mesa for generations to come. And so I'd like to see us explore working with other, you know, partners, private sector and public sector partners, so we can get our bang for the buck out of that event, which is not going to happen again in our lifetime. That's all I have. Anybody else before we go to the federal funding? Federal funding, hit it.
Thank you. Okay, for our federal funding update. So as you may recall, on January 7th, President Trump signed an executive order essentially freezing federal funding, which is currently being paused by the courts. So finance staff has continued to monitor the status of all of the executive orders, as well as other orders or actions that may potentially impact our city coffers. So we've provided here some of our annual funding sources that we get every year. CDBG and home funds, we get about $1.4 million annually ongoing that could potentially be withheld or frozen if this were to move forward. For CDBG, we get about $971,000. This is the 24-25 budget, where you can see the multiple areas where CDBG funds these monies. We've also, in this year, utilizing some prior year unspent allocations for $1.2 million. We're funding things like senior center roof replacement, some multiple public service grants like our senior center social worker, code enforcement officers, trellis, Human Options, Project Home Alliance, and some other administration costs. For our home, we received about $400,000 this current year. We're receiving, utilizing prior year to help fund some of our housing rehabilitation, about $310,000, home tenant-based rental assistance, and our community housing development organization projects. However, we also have been awarded multiple capital federal grants that potentially could also be clawed back or held back. Some of these, for example, are Adams Avenue Multipurpose Trail, about $4.2 million, which is currently in the design phase. Signal modernization for systemic safety improvements, also in the design phase for about $3.9 million. Fairview Road from Adams Avenue to Fair Drive, about $1.9 million. Our Adams Avenue Bicycle Facility Project, $1.8 million. The Safe Route to School Action Plan, which is currently contract, was awarded for about $630,000. Our Adams Avenue and Pine Creek Drive intersection project, we're almost done. So about 90% is done in the construction phase, for about $620,000. In our pedestrian safety festival for about $13.5 million of federal grants that could potentially be at risk. So in summary, even though the national economy is showing signs of a slowdown, we still have a very solid financial base here in the city of Costa Mesa. Our revenue, 3% change, is manageable. It can be achieved with some of these solutions that we've brought forth tonight by deferring capital projects, utilizing our gas tax funds, realizing some costs, some maybe other eligible funding streams. At this time, there's no anticipated cuts to our general fund services or programs. We have a very strong reserves that we can use between now and in the future if we need to. With all this in mind, though, for our 25-26 proposed budget, we are planning little to no growth, essentially only growth on those items that require growth to contractual increases. And we will stay in line with our normal conservative budget development projections. For our next steps, we'll be returning to the City Council. In fact, on March 18th, our next City Council meeting with a mid-year agenda report. Probably put a pause on the 3.6 million based on our conversation today, so we can have a little bit more time to deliberate on those capital projects. Staff will present the 25-26 proposed operating and CIP budget starting in July 1, 2025. We anticipate study sessions in April, May, and June to come forth before you as we do anticipate to continue slowing down. We'll be talking about solutions there as well, potentially as well taking another look at the capital projects. And staff will continue to monitor all of our revenues and expenditures, and we'll keep City Council informed of any major changes.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Council, does anybody want to take a second bite at the apple? Andrea?
Do you have questions? I just have closing thoughts. May I?
Whatever. Yeah, you may. Of course.
I'm just going to be a little bit pedantic for a second. Lorianne, how long have you been in Costa Mesa?
It'll be 6 years in July.
And how many of those years have we had budget surpluses?
Every year.
So this is a little abnormal for us.
Yes, except for COVID, obviously. But even in COVID, we ended up with a slight positive of like 120,000. But yes, this is unusual.
And we have more reserves than we've ever had before. Is that right?
Yes, I believe it's maybe 8 or so more from maybe 7 million or more.
A little bit about
back from 2019.
7.5 million. 7.5 million increase.
Yeah.
Yeah, than ever before in the history of the city.
That I know of. I haven't gone through all the years.
Yeah, you didn't go back. I'm pretty sure in the 80s we didn't have $60 million in reserve. Yeah, HL's laughing. Look, I appreciate the cut at this. I agree with Councilmember Bewley that I'm glad we got an early look and a chance to give a little bit of input. If I have to sort of summarize what I heard today, definitely another look at capital improvement. Definitely like poking street sweeping a little bit to see if there's anything that operationally we could just do differently in future years, even if it doesn't affect this year. And then I think, on the staffing side, I'll continue to look for recommendations from staff. I agree with everything that was said as it relates to, economic development and planning staff, and let's not cut off our noses to spite our face. I just wanted to end by saying I really have the utmost confidence in this team. I think you've done a tremendous job guiding us for 6 years. Ms. Molina, you've been here for a long time as well. This is a blip, and I think none of us up here are used to this. We're used to having reserves and trying to figure out how to spend the excess every year, which has been glorious. But we're on the right path, right? We're doing the right things early. We're trying to figure out where we need to tighten the belt. The reality is there are businesses all across America that are doing this exact same thing right now. These are somewhat unprecedented times. And regardless of what you might say about inflation or interest rates, the fact is there is a slowdown in the economy. There is fear of a recession. And so as a city, we need to do everything we can to be responsive to that without cutting so deep to the bone that we aren't able to provide the services that we are known for as a city, the things that make us great. So thank you for bringing all of this. I didn't say that in my initial comments. I wanted to close it out on a positive note, but I appreciate all the work that's going into this. Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, I just wanted, excuse me. So sorry to keep using the federal versus the city because that's just my world that I live in right now, but there are a lot of similarities. And one thing, I see the primary responsibility as me as a council person and us as one of the main priorities is to sustain, maintain, and move our infrastructure forward. I think that's a huge part of what we should be looking at, completing CIP projects. we're under a lot of stress, the federal government too. One thing we wouldn't do is we have 2 major mental health buildings going up right now. One thing that they're asking us to do is everything but interfere with the completion of this. It's that version of a CIP project. And on the staffing, I get it. And no, we're not looking at the cops at the fire. There's no way. I mean, that's just safety is secondary to nothing. So, but looking at staffing in a big city, in a big organization, it's a sensitive subject. We're talking about people's lives and livelihoods and laying off. It's a big deal, and I don't take those things lightly. When I ask questions about it, what I'm referring to is when we're looking, and this theme has already been brought up here several times, is when we're looking at saving money in a crisis, there's a bunch of different things we need to look at. And as a person representing a major part of this city, I want all the information before I make a decision, like all of it. And it very well could be that we need every single one of these staff members here in the city and leave it alone, including the FTE that are open. That very well could be the case. But I would like to see how much money, if we were to lay off people at the worst case scenario, how much would that save us? If we were to not mess with the open FTE and leave them and abolish those full-time equivalents, what would that save us going forward? If we didn't do all these CIP things, how much would that? I want to see all the numbers, and I know it's not possible down to the minute granular data, but I want to be informed when I'm making big decisions. And to say, look, if you don't fill these FTE, none of your priorities will get funded, will get completed. That's, to me, I hear that, but I'm asked in my current role, we have a full-on reduction of force taking place, and we were asked to look at our departments, and we need to find out, are we being efficient? And I think it's very well could be the case that there is not 100% efficiency in place. I'm not saying there is, but I want to be able to see, I want to be able to look at it and say, we're being 100% efficient with the resources we have now. I don't want somebody just to tell me that. I want to see it, and I want it to be proven to me, and then I want to make a decision. And it very well could be we need everybody, and let's move forward. I just want all the data. Thank you.
I have a question I forgot to answer. It's really quick. Of the 6.4, I think, in the shortfall in sales tax, how much of that is, done, and how much of it is projection?
Give me a quick minute.
Sure. Yeah. I don't have anything more to say. I just had that one question.
I've got a quick one.
Yeah, everybody will get a chance.
We're looking at more than half of that 6.4 million's already done. And we're continuing to see the next allocations continue to see growth, revenue loss.
Okay. So you said more than half, so roughly four-ish, right?
About
Four-ish is in the can, it's lower. And then, not holding it, just order of magnitude. About 2.4 is what you think is going to be the shortfall for the next two and a half months? Is that right?
Well, keep in mind, sales tax is 2 months in the rent, so we still have 6 months left to go.
Oh, I see.
Of revenues and the sales tax category to receive. So we literally just received the December sales tax allocation.
Interesting.
And remember that.
So that makes it even a little bit more concerning in the sense that the big amount that we would normally get is from December, and we just got that, and so we're through that 6 months through December, we're lagging $4 million.
But keep in mind that our holiday sales in December did come out very strong. It just wasn't strong enough to cover the loss that we had been experiencing. So even though we may be essentially flat for the rest of this year, we're still seeing a loss.
Got it. Okay, other council members wanted to speak. I think I heard Mike. Mike?
Were you ahead, Councilmember Reynolds?
whatever you guys want to do.
I had just a couple
Yeah,
questions.
go ahead, Arliss.
First,
On
then
the
I'll go.
federal piece. I just want to make sure I have a really good understanding, as best we can have right now, on the exposure or risk related to the uncertainty on federal funding. So what I understand from the staff report is the sources of federal funding are the 1.36 million from HUD, the OTS grant that comes through the state, and then the grant-funded projects. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and it's just the HUD funds that really support ongoing regular operations. We mentioned 4-point-something FTEs.
Correct.
Correct, okay. And so, but I think the best I know is that all of these are at risk of getting stopped at any point. Let me know if we have different information. The staff report says that the FTEs, the HUD-funded FTEs, we do have sufficient balance to cover that for one more year. So is that in the 25-26 budget that we feel comfortable that we can fund those?
That's in
After
the-
that's at risk?
It's in the fund balance. So we have sufficient fund balance to go one more year.
25-26.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So we're confident we can fund them this year. Confident we can fund them through next year.
We're still reviewing 25, 26.
Okay. So it's possible that those 4.17 FTEs, we don't currently have identified funding for.
We're still
if HUD funding
reviewing,
goes
yeah.
away. Okay.
we're still
Okay.
not.
Okay. So that's certainly something I know you're already looking at, but to me, sort of the biggest item at risk. And then the biggest line item here is the 13.5 million of grant-funded projects. I know these are one-time grants. What's the status on these? I think these were stopped and then told to start again, or what do we know about likelihood of these continuing to be funded?
We don't know what the likelihood is. It's currently in the courts. The courts is currently stating that if whatever you've spent, that definitely cannot be frozen. So if we've already spent it, we should be receiving the reimbursement for. So for example, some of these projects, like the construction phase, 90%, that makes me happy because that makes me,
Yeah.
we'll get that money back.
So what is our positioning on that? Are we moving forward? Are we accelerating them so that we can, request those funds as soon as possible? Or are we delaying them because of the uncertainty? How are we approaching that uncertainty?
At this moment in time, we're moving forward. We have not received any information that there will be any, funding frozen or clawed back.
Okay. And am I correct in my understanding that those three items, so the grant-funded projects, OTS, and the HUD funds, that's the extent of our exposure on federal, at least direct federal impacts in terms of stopping funding?
On the annual side, yes.
What am I missing? What's not on the annual side?
Those are annual. HUD is an annual amount allocation we've been receiving for years. That
Got
could
it.
essentially be frozen and stopped.
Okay. So there's
Moving
nothing
forward.
else in our general annual budget that.
Not that we know of now.
Okay.
As of now, that could be potentially have, a residual effect.
Okay. So if we take out the CIP related stuff, the HUD piece, and OTS, it's a relatively small fraction of our total budget.
Correct.
Okay. That makes me feel better than I did at the start of the night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor Stevens. Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I was looking at this, page 27, the awarded capital federal grants, and I just wanted clarification, and I think I understand it, but the only one where we've actually broken ground and mobilized is the Adams Ave Pine Creek that's 90% completed, and the rest are all in planning and contracting phases.
That's correct.
Okay, and then it's my understanding, and this may be for city manager or city attorney, I believe in one conversation that should we get to contracting phase for the actual construction or whatnot, and funding is frozen or funding's withdrawn, we have provisions in our agreements to, we don't have to go forward and we're not exposed to liability. If our funding that was the basis for entering into the contract dries up, we've got an out provision.
Yeah, we typically do. it does require that we give notice, and we have to pay through whatever period of time is until we have given that notice.
Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you, Mike. Manuel?
Thank you, John. And again, I just want to reiterate kind of Andrea's point of the excellence this team has done these past 5 years, that this is the first time we're looking at a budget shortfall, and ability one that we can definitely adjust and accommodate. So I want to commend Lorianne and staff for shepherding us these 5 years through tough times like COVID and still keeping us in the black. However, I'm also not remiss to understand a quote from Winston Churchill, which is, never let a good crisis go to waste. I look at this as an opportunity for us as Costa Mesa to really look at ourselves and our processes and see how can we tweak things to improve our services for our community and our business partners. And there's really just kind of 5 things I quickly want to touch on as I look at this as more of an opportunity than something of a crisis to be like handled abruptly. One, I do agree with Mayor Stevens that this council, and I have been part of this council that's done these votes, we have hired a lot of full-time employees. And I do know, because I see it every budget year, that not all these positions are fulfilled. And I see us sometimes using these positions as ways to create savings in our budget. I would rather us be a bit more efficient and really look at the historical past 5 years, see if there's been positions that we really can't fill for whatever reason, and decide if we have to fill these or not. 75% of our budget is employees. I have no interest in going after current employees whatsoever, none at all. But if we're seeing positions not be filled, maybe it's time for us to look at those and say if we need them or don't need them. Secondly, and again, before I move on, I want to reiterate that in my eyes, the three areas we should not touch ever are public safety with fire, police, and dispatchers, and revenue creating employees like development services. Those are things that are just fundamental to what we need to do as a community. And I don't want to see us tweaking that at all. I do want us looking at how we're trying to improve our revenue streams. Tesla is a great opportunity for us to track and see how long it takes for businesses and see how long it takes them to go through the process. I will admit I am happy with the work we're doing to become more efficient in the city. I want to commend our staff for that. But I also want to acknowledge that I'm probably never going to be truly happy, because I think there's always going to be room to be even better and more efficient. And I think having that mindset and looking at ways to see if we can improve the process for our businesses, the process for people that want to build ADUs in their homes, people that want to just renovate their homes, will benefit us in the long run. And alongside of that kind of point, I want us to be looking at any revenue stream that we have that we're not fully maximizing cost recovery. There's 3 things I'm really looking at that I want us to look at. One is TOT. If makes sense, we should look at TOT. This has been discussed through council the past 6 years, and maybe timing could be better, but that is something that we know we're below par in the county and as an average. Our city fees, are we truly doing cost recovery? I'm not trying to gouge anyone trying to develop in Costa Mesa or trying to have business in Costa Mesa, but we should be looking at and seeing, are we truly recovering our cost? Because it's not fair for our residents to be subsidizing other people. That just isn't fair. And 3, and maybe it might be a little controversial for some folks, is, are we charging a competitive market rate for our amenities like our tennis center, pickleball, and golf? I know I talk a lot with the Ball Brothers in tennis center. I know we are well below the county average for pickleball. That's why we're really crowded with pickleball players. So we can still be below market and be more competitive. So it's something I want us to look at. 3, and Andrea made this point and John repeated it, I think it is high time we really look at the CIP and do our due diligence and go at it line by line. I pointed out multiple times in my tenure that there's items on the CIP that no one on the council is championing because they were there from a prior council before I got on city council. I'm sitting here now with 2 new council members who may also want to exert their influence, exert their perspective as they represent 2 parts of Costa Mesa in their districts. I think that's very appropriate to also bring that back with recommendations from staff about what has to be prioritized, either for cost reasons or because it's just a safety issue. But I don't think we should be shying away from those type of discussions. These are healthy things to have for a city of our size. And my last 2 points, I don't know how much we'll discover by having an evaluation like John mentioned, but I do think in the spirit of evaluating ourselves and seeing how we can improve for our residents, I'd be open to having a discussion. Because again, for me, I see this as a good opportunity for us to look internally and see how we can improve ourselves for our residents and our business community. But my last point, and this is really the point I wanted to drive home, is, in my eyes, everything in life is a pendulum that swings from left to right. You see it politically, you see it with issues, and even our city of Costa Mesa has that history of cycles. John got me this book a long time ago. It's the history of Costa Mesa. It's in Goat Hill City of the Arts. And it's really cool learning about our prior history, our prior mayors, and the issues they were facing in their time. And one of the funny things about this book and reading about the history of Costa Mesa through the prior mayors of our city is there is a general shift every about 15 to 10 years, where it shifts from focusing on residents to focusing on development to getting more revenue to then go back to the residents, needing more revenue to going back to the business community. I think this is a good example, this budget, of it's probably time for us to move the pendulum a little bit back and look at ways to maximize our revenue streams. This is a very healthy, organic thing to do. We're still going to prioritize our residents, but I think the focal point for me these next 2 years is setting up the city to be successful for the council that follows me. I was very lucky to have had a good city so that I could prioritize things in my community that were drastically needed. Westside Costa Mesa is drastically better thanks to the leadership of the city and this council than it was 5 years ago. And I'm saying, as a council member of District 4, Westside Costa Mesa, that I'm fully comfortable with us looking at ways to improve our revenue streams for our residents. Ultimately, the more revenue we have, the more budget security we have, the more we can invest in our community. So again, I want to thank staff for this really good presentation. I'm really grateful that you guys brought this forward and also have solutions that we can possibly address it. But I also want to do this as an opportunity to not waste a good crisis and see how we can improve ourselves for our residents and business community.
Anybody else? All right, we're adjourned. Oh, sorry.
Actually, can I just do a recap? Of
course.
Just to make sure I captured everything. And so what I'm hearing is let's bring back forward some more detailed information on the CIP. So we have the April 22nd CIP, which is going to be focused more on next year, but we can make that a two-part. It's going to be in 5 weeks. We can make that a two-part. That's a recommendation for next year, but then bring the entire CIP projects, general funds supported, if you will, and then all the restricted funds so that you can see that, and we'll come with details on the health and safety aspects, if any, if something's a match, if something is funded by a different source, which different source, so that could be a lot more detailed. And we would still have that information in time to be able to cut the current year CIP if needed, so we could do both at the same time. And then in terms of the positions and recommendations on that, I'll be working with department heads and HR, and you'll probably get that recommendation in May, because if we come to the determination that some of these positions that have been vacant for some time can be cut, that'll be incorporated in our recommendations for next year as well. So we've already achieved savings this year, which you've seen in terms of salary savings because they're empty, but the recommendations about which ones to cut we'll make when we come back in May, because we would cut those positions in the current year and we'll get the benefit of that savings for next year, and we can get into the detailed conversation of what we're recommending to eliminate from the table of organization and why, how long they've been vacant, why we feel it's appropriate to cut those positions, et cetera. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about the positions, because that's a little bit more analysis, and we can build that into next year so that we can help to balance next year's budget as well if this continues. Does that sound good? And then we'll talk about efficiencies. We'll bring back the cost recovery information that we have, which is maybe 12 months, maybe. We did do a study, and so we can bring that information for sure. The fees are low, so we can bring that information to bring it current to about maybe 2 years ago. There'd be another study to bring it more up to date, but that'll give you a sense, and we would still be comfortably below market. And then we'll look at some of the other revenue-generating items that you mentioned as well. And so we'll bring that back, starting with April 22nd, if that's okay.
If I could add just one request, I would, for the CIP, the full CIP discussion, I would appreciate getting recommendations also from the different, like the PACS Commission and the different committees in the areas that we've asked them to study. So I would want to get recommendations from, I'm probably missing, but what comes to mind is PACS, Finance, Active Transportation.
I think we usually do that. How is the schedule? Carol, you and Raja know better. Would we have to flip the order then? I'm not sure that we can make April 2nd if we do that, because typically we present to you and then go to PACS and FIPAC. Is that correct? Or am I wrong?
We would be going to FIPAC April 9th, then council, but PACS would be in May. So that would be later.
So we can try to work and see if we can front load both. So we'll take a look at that. Okay.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, we're adjourned.